Hey guys, this is Ash, and you're watching WriterGAsh. So today I'm going to be doing my Siege and Storm, the second book in Shadow and Bone series, Booktalk. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the spoilers, because this is the second book. So at this point, you have to have read the first book at the very least. So just be aware, this is going to be filled with spoilers. So this book picks up where Shadow and Bone leaves off, with Alina going on the run from the Darkling, basically. And her and Mal kind of started growing on me a little. I will admit I really liked Mal in the first half of this book, before he started becoming a douchebag again and didn't really listen to Alina. I liked him at that point. I will say that this Mal is a lot more similar to the TV show Mal, the first half again. And I really like that. I could have shipped him if he was this guy most of the series. But anyway, that's just not the main point. But they're on the run and surprisingly easily caught. We barely get a few chapters of them on the run, and they're caught by the Darkling and his soldiers, or his Grisha, and they're taken to the ship, Strummond's ship. I think I'm saying his name right. But Strumhond, later turns out to be Prince Nikolai Lantsov, who is one of the best characters of this entire series, of this Grisha Wars. I really liked his character, the way he developed. Even in the beginning, he wasn't a pompous prince. He really contrasts with his entire family. With Vasily and him, you see the difference in these two men. Vasily is completely complacent in his royal title. He depends on it, and he does nothing for his people. He doesn't give a shit about his people. But Nikolai, on the other hand, actually cares. And you see that. And everything he does is because of Ravka and the Ravkan people. And I love that development of him. His dedication to Ravka was impressive, in my opinion. And I really like that. Anyway, going back. So, Strummond at this point, because we don't know, he's Prince Nikolai. And is the captain of the ship. He's a privateer. And the Darkling hires him to take them to the second amplifier, the Sea Whip. And by now we know that Mal is an exceptional tracker, so he basically uses Mal to find the Sea Whip. And they find it impressively quickly, like that. I will say, him threatening to skin Alina, oof. If you've watched my last book talk about Shadow and Bone, you know how I feel about the manipulative asshole that the Darkling is. I did like him before all of that. And I think he's a really, really intense and interesting villain. But it's just, oof. This, reading about that was intense, I will say, at the very least. Anyway, so they find the Sea Whip, and this time I think Alina kills it. I can't remember. I believe Alina kills it and then wears these cuffs as amplifiers. And the Darkling is basically using her, feeding more power to her so he can use her to his advantage. And it's clear at this point. And just, despite everything, a part of me had hoped he could be redeemable, but there is nothing to redeem about him because he just uses people. And honestly, I read the Janya chapter, which I talked about in my previous book talk, chapter or novella or whatever, and it is just intense, of course, but it also really highlights how he doesn't really give a shit about anyone. He puts Jenya in such a bad position, and he does that repeatedly with people. He doesn't care about anyone else as long as he gets what he wants, and he's just absolutely irredeemable, but he's an interesting villain in my opinion. Anyway, and then we find out that Strummond was never really working for the Darkling and helps Alina and Mal escape. Like their whole crew basically helps them escape. And oh my god, we get to meet Talia and Tamar, who are amazing. They're one of the best characters in this series, and I just love them straight off the bat. They look at Alina as a saint, and they kind of, despite that, they don't ever treat her the way the Apparat or some of the other devotees do. They treat her with respect and respect her autonomy, and I love their support, like the way they bring Alina up. I think this is going to be so interesting to watch in this TV show, because in the TV show, Alina is canonically half Shu, and that isn't something that's touched on in the books. I don't even know if she is in the books. Her race is never talked about, but we do know for sure that Talia and Tamar are half Shu as well. Their father was Shu. So it's going to be interesting to see how they help Alina deal with all of the racism she has been dealt in the world, because we see her being treated like shit in the TV show sometimes because of her Shu heritage, and it's going to be nice to have them in the mix as well. So while Strummond and his team are helping Alina escape, Genya helps them too, and in that moment I felt so much joy. Genya was my favorite character in the last book, and while I did mention I wasn't really heartbroken by anything in that book, it still hurt to have Genya betray them, but it was fantastic to see her kind of stand up to the Darkling and do what she believed in for her friend, because she does think of Alina as a friend, and that is just so nice. And then we have our crew travel back to Ravka, and there Nikolai introduces himself. Basically, he reveals that Strummond's identity is something he uses as a privateer, but he is Nikolai Lantsov. And they go into the little palace and get Mal dishonorably discharged or whatever. I, at this point, still like Mal. It was just around the time where they had that moment where Mal and Alina, I think, were gonna kiss, and Alina saw the Darkling and flinched, and he retorted with, "I've been with enough girls to know when someone doesn't want my touch." Along those lines. I can't remember the exact dialogue. Instead of caring about why she responded that way, he kind of backhanded her like that. He's like, "I know you don't have any experience, but this is not how someone who wants my touch would react." Instead of saying that, he could have been like, "What's going on? I know you're going through so much. There's so much trauma in your life. You have to deal with so much bullshit right now. You have to put up such an image. Tell me what's wrong. Talk to me. We're best friends." Before anything else. If he had reacted like that, that is how I want him to react. And not him reacting the way he did was just, ugh. Anyway, going back, because this is a little bit ahead in time. So Nikolai basically tells Alina they should pretend to be engaged because it would be good for Ravka to have their sun saint be the future princess or whatever, and Alina is definitely not for it. I do not ship Nikolai and Alina. I personally don't ship Alina with anyone in the books. I like the idea of Alina being Alina and being happy in herself. Maybe if she finds a love interest in the future, go for it. But in the end, I just feel like she needs to be herself. Anyway, moving on. What I did love was Alina taking on the Second Army and her basically being a leader. I loved seeing that. And her taking on the Darkling's helm. Filling that seat in a way that was much better. She worked to get rid of all the barriers he created, all the internal differences he created within the different Grisha. And in the end, if she had had more time with them, she could have helped flourish the Grisha in a way the Darkling never did, because he had people under his foot instead of bringing them up. And yes, there was like remnants of the Darkling's effect on them, and a lot of them didn't accept Alina wholeheartedly. And it's just complex, but I think with time that could have worked out better. There's a lot of things going on that I didn't think deserved much mention. So skipping past all of that, let's get to the end. Towards the end, when they're having that dinner and the Darkling attacks, I didn't see the Darkling's attack coming. None of them would have expected it until Alina realized what was happening because of the fucking prince, what's his name, Wasili's arrogance, and he's just an asshole. Glad he's dead. Anyway, and then the Darkling attacks and kills most of the second army. He kills the very people he spent years cultivating and supporting. And you know what's worst? What the worst thing about it is? The whole reason he did everything he did, like the justification of his actions, justification being in air quotes, was that he wanted to create a world safe for the Grisha. He wanted to create a world where they didn't have to fear for their lives. And then he goes and kills everyone he basically helped up until, well, the beginning of Shadow and Bone. And it was heartbreaking to see Alina go into the little palace and discover all of them being dead. It was just so fucking sad. And then the Darkling and Alina have a face-off, and she absolutely wrecks him like he deserves. Like, she basically accesses his power. And, in doing this, though, Alina herself is kind of wrecked in return, and like she has a transformation of sorts. Side note, the way the Darkling retaliated against Genya, he brutalized her for protecting Alina, for betraying him after he basically let her. The Darkling's treatment of Genya is probably the thing I hate most about him. I hate a lot of things. He's a manipulative asshole who is not good, but his treatment of Genya is just a different level of disgusting. Anyway, so that is it for my thoughts on Siege and Storm, and while it was a really difficult book for me to get through, like, I struggled really hard with it. I think that was me this past month with most of the books I read. It's halfway, almost 2/3 of the way through May, and I've only read 70% of King of Scars. I have not been able to finish a book in so long, and I think partly I am to blame. I just don't have the mental state for reading right now. But at the same time, I think it's the Grishaverse. It is written for a more YA audience, and I think if I would have read this back in the day, I would have swallowed it. Like, I would have loved it so much. And I love the world, and I love the story. I'm just not connecting with it. I did connect, like, the reason Six of Crows was different for me is because I read it before, and I read it when I was younger, so I still have that connection, and I just reread it. And while I did struggle in the beginning, the story still hit. It's just, with the rest of it, it's not the same experience. But I'm still enjoying the story. I'm still enjoying the world. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's worth it. But also, I enjoyed the TV show more, and that's never happened before, guys. Anyway, so that's it for my views for Siege and Storm. And tune right back in for Ruin and Rising.